This is the lecture on methods of assessment in special education. My name is Dr. George Giuliani from Hofstra University, and today what we'll be talking about are various methods of assessment that are used in special education. And the first thing we need to do before we even get into this is to discuss what is assessment. What does this term assessment actually mean? An assessment in special education is a process that involves collecting information about a student for the purposes of making decisions. So again, assessment in special education is a process that involves collecting information about a student for the purpose of making decisions. So let's break this definition down. First, assessment in special education. Well, we've discussed special education in a prior lecture, so I won't get into that. But it says is a process. Now think about it. What does it mean if something is a process? What is a process? Well, a process is a series of actions that bring about a result. All right, the process of becoming a teacher, the process of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's the process of doing anything. It's a step-by-step series of actions that bring about a result. And in special education, what we find is that assessment is primarily a problem-solving process. We've got kids who are reading very poorly. We've got kids who are having difficulty functioning in class. We've got kids who are struggling each day, and we have to figure out what is going on here, what is actually happening, and what can we do to make their lives better. So assessment in special education is primarily a problem-solving process. So if we go back to the definition, assessment in special education is a process that involves collecting information. And that's so much of what you're going to be doing in assessment. We're going to collect a lot of information about a student. We're going to collect a whole history of information. We're going to collect academic history. We're going to collect, as you will see throughout this course, a lot of information that's going to be very relevant to making classification decisions as well as educational decisions. So, assessment in special education is a process that involves collecting information about a student for the purpose of making decisions. And that's the key piece here, for the purpose of making decisions. Ultimately, in special education, we have to make decisions. We have to make numerous decisions. We have to make decisions whether or not a child is going to meet the eligibility standards for special education. We're going to have to make decisions regarding the educational placement of the child. We're going to have to make decisions about where the child is going to be educated, the content that we're going to educate the child with. There are going to be numerous decisions that are going to be made based on the assessment of a child. So, just to review, the definition of assessment is a process that involves collecting information about a student for the purpose of making decisions. Now, there are many different methods of assessment that are used in special education. We're going to discuss 4 of them in this lecture, the 4 critical ones that are used when we do various types of methodology and assessment. And those are going to be observations, interviews, portfolio assessments, and the big one, testing. So let's first start with observations. Observations. Now, observation is a word that you clearly have heard. It's a word that you know. But an observation is an actual assessment technique whereby one observes the student in his or her natural environment. And observing the student and his or her environment is a very important part of the assessment process, an extremely important part of the assessment process. Observing the student in the classroom and in other settings where the student operates can provide a lot of valuable information. When we observe students in the classroom and outside of the classroom, we can get a lot of information about this particular student. And for our purposes, what can we find out? Well, we can find out about the academic skills of the student. We can find out about the motor skills and the physical skills of the student. We can find out about communication skills of the student. We can examine the social skills of the student. And we can also look at how the student manages his world, the management skills of the student. So when we do observations, we can find out a lot about this particular student and the various skills, whether those be academic, motor physical, communication, social, or management. Now, there are 2 types of observation that you need to understand: non-systematic and systematic. Non-systematic observation is where the observer simply watches the student in his or her environment and notes the behaviors, characteristics, and personal interactions that seem significant. And we'll see the slides on anecdotal recording on this. And you'll notice on this slide there's a typo. It should say the observer simply watches the student in his or her environment, not simply watches the observer. Systematic observation is where the observer sets out to observe one or more precisely defined behaviors. The observer specifies observable events that define the behavior and then measure the behavior in a certain way. So think of it this way. Non-systematic observation is we simply go in and just watch the student. We just watch. We have no agenda. We're not looking for anything in particular. We just go in and watch. There's no system to what it is that we're trying to do. We just go in and observe the student. We note the behaviors, the characteristics, we note their interactions, but we're not going in with a specific agenda regarding anything. And again, we'll talk more about this when we talk about anecdotal recording. While in systematic observation, we have a very precisely defined behavior. We're looking for something in particular. We're looking for how long the child gets up out of his seat. We're looking for how many times the child taps a pen. We're looking for how many times the child blurts out blurts out an answer. We're looking for how long the child starts the tantrum. Whatever the case may be, we're looking for something very specific. And we'll talk about that when we look at the slides on event recording and duration recording. And this will end the first lecture, the first video on observation. You can go now to video number 2.